Welcome back to My Child Can't Read, a Heartland Crisis. I'm your host, Jessica Glover, and this is Season 3, From Resistance to Revolution. This season is about the people changing literacy from the ground up. Parents, teachers, advocates, and those of us who once trusted a system we thought we understood, until we learned the truth. Season 3 is about courage. The courage to question what we were taught, to confront what wasn't working, and to step into a movement rewriting the future of millions of children. And we begin here with the teacher's story, because everything that follows depends on understanding one thing. Our teachers were never given the training they needed to teach reading based on how the brain actually learns. Not in Kansas, not in most of the country. Parents weren't told that. Teachers weren't told why their programs were failing kids. And no one told families what that gap would cost. But now the truth is finally coming to light. And once you know better, you fight for better. This season, we're diving into the heart of that fight. Teacher voices, parent advocacy, misdiagnosis, and SPED blind spots. Rural organizing, systemic barriers, the realities and the hope of dyslexia. Because this revolution isn't just about exposing gaps. It's about teachers who are searching for real training, teachers who are trying to bridge theory to practice, teachers who want coaching and support, teachers who are learning the science of reading for the first time, and teachers who still haven't been given the chance, but deserve to be equipped to help every child read. Season 3 is the story of resistance becoming revolution, of parents finally being told the truth and learning how to advocate, of communities rising when the system says no, and of a movement refusing to look away. Season 3 starts right here. Let's begin. If you've been with this podcast from the beginning, you know that reading isn't natural. We're not born wired for it. We build it, neuron by neuron, sound by sound, letter by letter. But what happens when the people responsible for teaching those connections, our teachers, were never taught how the brain actually learns to read? What happens when they enter the classroom unprepared, unsupported, and blamed for outcomes they could never have prevented? That's where Season 3 begins. How the brain learns to read. Let's zoom out for just a moment, because to understand the revolution happening now, we have to remember how the brain actually learns to read. This comes from the work of cognitive neuroscientist Stanislas Dehaene, whose research changed everything. He showed that reading is not instinctive. The brain recycles a visual pattern recognition area and transforms it into the word form area, the place where written words become instantly recognizable. But that only happens once the brain learns the alphabetic principle, the code that links sounds to letters, phonemes to graphemes. And to be clear, this isn't just about phonics. As Dr. Marianne Wolf reminds us, the reading circuit is a full system: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. You cannot remove one part and expect reading to function. This isn't new, it's ancient. The Puritans understood that children needed explicit code instruction. McGuffey Readers used decodable patterns because they aligned with how the brain builds literacy. And after decades of research, we know systematic explicit instruction works because the brain requires that structured pathway. Kids learn to read when the method finally matches how the brain is wired to take in phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. That's why structured literacy works, because it gives the brain exactly what it needs in the way it needs it. So why weren't teachers taught this? Why weren't kids given it? This is where today's episode begins, in the space between what research has shown for decades and what actually reached classrooms. And as researcher Timothy Odegard argues, Simply changing laws doesn't guarantee change. The systems that support screening, teacher training, and coaching must be built for policy to actually reach students. Without those implementation supports, legislation can exist on paper without real impact, a gap many teachers and schools are still facing.
My name is Timothy Odegard. Everybody knows me as Tim. My connection to literacy is personal because I myself struggle with learning how to read early in life and struggled to get the support I needed in school. So I kind of positioned myself eventually to be in a research space and also in a practice space to understand how we can better meet the needs of kids. And in doing that, I really realized that, like me, where reading and spelling was a real problem, it's more than just reading. It really is a word level literacy challenge that a lot of us in ourselves find challenges. So that's really my personal connection.
Even when policy changes, students won't feel the impact unless the systems supporting teachers are built for success. As Tim Odegard reminds us,
it's not laws that solve the problems of the world, it's the people who enact the laws. And so they often don't think about the systems that support the work that has to be done, nor the knowledge it takes to carry that work out, and the time and the treasure, the resources of money and funding that it takes to really bring something to fruition. Then on the back end of that, I think that policymakers and other people in high levels really forget that you have to come up with a supportive context to support people, to bring people in, to get the buy-in that you need to do something. That means you have to be consistent. And all too often it's just you pass the law and then the gaze shifts. But it's going to take years to really implement a law to full implementation and do it well. But the gaze has already moved. So people are left to wonder, is it really important?
if you haven't listened to Season 2, Episode 3, where we explored the neuroscience behind reading and the myth of the natural reader, I encourage you to go back and listen after this episode. It sets the stage for everything you're going to hear today. Now, let's talk about the teachers, the ones who carried the guilt, the ones who walked into classrooms determined to help kids and were handed methods that didn't match the brain science. And because of that, dyslexia often went unrecognized. For decades, the system wasn't set up to identify it. So what looks like a sudden rise today is really just better naming of a long-standing challenge. It doesn't make sense if you hear that 20% of the population has dyslexia and 60% of kids can't read. They can't all have dyslexia. Tim Odegard explains how we distinguish students who truly have dyslexia from those impacted by inadequate instruction.
Doesn't make sense if you hear that the highest rate of dyslexia is 20% and your 60% of your kids can't read and spell words.
Yeah.
They can't all have dyslexia. So how do you distinguish the kids who have dyslexia from the ones who are just the victims of poor education?
That's a good question.
We know the answer to that. It's just hard because that means it takes systemic change in elevating all the education for all the students. But what defines dyslexia is that we are really hard to remediate, and there's key defining characteristics which persist even when we get the best of intervention. We can learn how to read accurately a lot better. We can learn even how to spell better, but we'll have persistent hallmarks that characterize us. Other kids who have historically been called garden variety poor readers, they get pulled out once you do really high quality intervention within a system that runs well. My own research has shown that a couple years back, with Anna Middleton being the lead author on that in the Journal of Learning Disabilities.
Many policymakers and even educators still misunderstand what it takes for students to master reading. Here's another perspective from Tim.
This conception that policymakers have is that it's the science of reading, because reading is just one part of it. There's the writing too. And so just take dyslexia, for example. It's reading and writing. It's word reading based out of our ability to sound out and pronounce words and say them properly to get to their meaning, but also to write them and to spell them properly, to where we can actually express our thoughts in written expression. And so the misconception we have just because this is the way that the term was created, was the science of reading, is that it's really about literacy. And literacy is reading and writing. And when it comes to dyslexia, that's reading words and spelling words, because dyslexia is at the word level. And those of us who struggle at the word level will have these persistent challenges with learning how to read and spell words. And that sounds simple, and it's simply stated, but it's complex to understand in its intricacies, and clarity is key.
Teacher voices. We weren't taught this. Across the interviews we've conducted, Kansas and beyond, rural districts, urban districts, one theme comes up again and again. I was never taught how to teach reading. Not phonemic awareness, not decoding, not the structure of language, not dyslexia, not the word form area, not the alphabetic principle. Teachers told us they were trained to create literacy-rich environments, to encourage kids to guess, to rely on pictures, to prompt them with meaning instead of sound. They weren't taught how reading actually works in the brain. And when their students struggled, teachers blamed themselves. Parents blamed teachers. Administrators blamed teachers. And kids blamed themselves. But the truth? The system failed everyone. And until we name that clearly, we can't change it. A big gap is that teachers often have the expectation without the infrastructure or training to implement it. Tim Odegard explains.
A big gap is they have high expectations with a few words about what they want to see enacted. They pull together teams of people to then write out the code or the procedures for what's supposed to happen, but the guidelines. And then when you get down there, there's often not the support that the educators need to implement and put that into place. So in the recent issues of Annals of Dyslexia, I think that the screening papers that did teacher surveys are really good examples of this. They found that the teachers were not often trained on them. They felt ill-prepared to deliver them. They felt ill-prepared to interpret them. They felt like oftentimes they didn't have the infrastructure it took, nor the time and the space to do it well. Those are all practical constraints. So as a nation, we never would have survived as a nation if we didn't have the logistics to actually take a command on high and put it into action in the field. And so when we don't actually think through the people that we need on the field and the support that they need, the training they need, the ability to interpret and make those decisions on the ground, we're missing the big piece here. So I think that what they forget is that you have all these people out there that need your support. And it's challenging to allocate the resources to do it well, especially when there's not consistency to the mission. And if the mission is for literacy, then we should stay focused on that mission.
Balanced literacy is still the dominant model in many classrooms. Diane House, PK through 8th grade principal at Skyline School in Pratt, Kansas, has been a champion for the struggling readers in her district. She changed the entire way her school schedule was designed to put the needs of the students first. Her out-of-the-box thinking and willingness to do what's best for kids has improved the lives of many of the students in her district. I asked her why balanced literacy continues to hold so much power even though it has been proven ineffective.
Well, I think it goes back to that resistance to change, resistance to say we've done wrong. I think it is hard work. It can be laborious with struggling readers. And so we want to add these other components that maybe feel good in the moment. But I just go back to that kids love to learn, and you can bring passion and excitement to whatever you're teaching them. But when you think about education, most of us were probably successful in the education model. That's why we entered the field. And so it's really one of the very few industries where you spend your developing years in that system. You go off, get trained, come back, and you can continue practices from 100 years ago that have just stayed in the classroom. There really aren't very many fields where that happens, but we were successful with those old practices, and therefore we just go back to those old practices.
That resistance to change, the familiarity of old methods, the comfort of what worked for us came up in nearly every teacher interview. Now listen to kindergarten teacher Joyce Tiemanson, who has taught for 32 years.
I guess you could say a victim of the whole language.
Okay.
Teaching. That's what I was taught in college. Fountas and Pinnell, they were my Bibles. And those were the first things that you'd grab when you were trying to do reading instruction because they had all the answers. We weren't taught that there were different stages that kids had to go through to learn reading. We weren't taught that rhyming is huge in the beginning process of reading, or syllables, or the sound manipulation. We weren't taught to tell kids, take the sounds and put them together. With whole language, you were taught, look at the picture. What sound does it start with? What word do you think would make sense there? And when I listen to the podcast, Sold a Story, you kind of get this pit in your stomach because that's how you were teaching. And it's like, wow, what a disservice I did to my student.
Her guilt ran deep, even decades into her career. She told me about a former student, now a teacher herself. Joyce asked her, "Can you read?" She was terrified she had failed her. That's the weight teachers carry, even when they were never given the tools. And then there's Danielle Morris, who has spent 20 years fighting for students without the training she needed.
I've been fighting for 20 years for students on this, and it's just nothing's been available. And when it's available, it's very limited.
Yeah, well, we're really in the beginnings, I think, as a state.
Yes.
Dyslexia finally got acknowledged 2 years ago.
It used to be we couldn't even say it to parents. Like, you could get in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And now we're saying more, but now we're like, can we get training so that we can help these students? Because I know about it. I know what the warning signs are, but what can I do?
Danielle wasn't alone. Teacher after teacher told us dyslexia was taboo, a word you whispered, not a reality you prepared for. Teacher Voices, what we were taught instead. Many teachers described their training as philosophy heavy and practice light. Kendra Heim, a former principal and now department chair at WSU Tech, put it this way.
When I became a principal, one of my first priorities was to bring in a structured reading program because up until that point, like I had said, the teachers were left on their own to piece together things to make a curriculum. Our teachers were still struggling because whole language or balanced literacy approaches, just didn't provide enough of the structure or clarity for how to reach students with such complex needs. And the biggest challenge was figuring out how to truly teach these students to read when the programs available were not designed with them in mind. In our school, many of the students who struggled, unfortunately, they continued to struggle. Too often during our IEP meetings, the conclusion came up that they simply were not capable of learning to read due to the nature of their disabilities. But in some cases, that was true, but there were also other students that we realized could have learned to read had we known about dyslexia. I know that now, and I've had to live with that. And, once I started here at Phillips and learning all the different things about, alphabetic phonics, I wish I had known that then.
Yeah.
I really think we could have helped a lot of those students.
That grief, that recognition came up again and again. And some stories were even more stark. Retired teacher and assessor Joan Stambaugh moved to Topeka and was forbidden from teaching phonics. She knew it worked, but she had to smuggle materials and teach secretly. She later realized many students labeled as moderate to severe disabilities were almost certainly dyslexic and could have learned to read. And because of that, kids were misunderstood, misdiagnosed, and mislabeled. Teacher guilt and emotional weight. Across those interviews, one theme echoed. We didn't know what we didn't know. Teachers described guilt, doubt, fear, a sense of personal failure for systemic problems they didn't create. Here's Joyce Timonson again, sharing the guilt and the weight of failure.
We thought we were this great reading teacher, and then here years later, you find out, oh, you were doing it all wrong. Then you kind of go back and you think about the students that you had. There were those students that got it no matter what. And then there were those students who didn't. And I think about them and I think, oh, wow, what damage did I do to those poor children who didn't get it and who I wasn't giving those key skills to make better readers. So you kind of go back and you have a little bit of regret that I didn't do it the right way. Yeah, definitely. some things that we missed out on in our teaching education. And so they taught a whole generation of teachers whole language. And now it's all kind of cratering in on us, like, go back to the basics. People make fun of, oh, are you teaching them how to read Dick and Jane books? Well, the Dick and Jane books are exactly what students need. They're decodable. They go together. They're simple. Those were books that we should have been doing instead of all those beautiful books that we had that kids couldn't decode and were guessing at words and looking at pictures to read them.
And then there's the emotional weight teachers carry, the fear that their students' struggles reflect their competence. Here's Kendra Heim sharing what that felt like for them.
I'll be honest, when I went through my first training at Phillips Fundamental, I carried a lot of guilt. And I mentioned that before. I, just picture in the faces of my previous students, and had we just realized that they were dyslexic and been able to give them that opportunity. One of the instructors said something to me that I'll never forget. She said, "You can't beat yourself up. You only knew what you knew. Now you know more. And once you know, you have to do better." And that's the message I wish policymakers would take to heart. Once we know what works, we don't have the excuse of doing anything less. Every student deserves the right instruction. It's just the right thing to do.
My name is Jan Davis, and I'm a lifelong educator. I started teaching in the Wichita Public Schools in the early 60s. I spent about 15 years in the classroom before I left and became a teaching specialist, where I worked with teachers who were having difficulty managing their classrooms and with the curriculum. From then, I became an administrator. I was an assistant principal at a junior high, and I was an elementary principal for 3 years. After that, I became an assistant superintendent for the Wichita Public Schools, where I was the ombudsperson. I worked with multicultural education and affirmative action. After that, I retired and I went to collegiate, which is the reason I became involved with Fundamental, because I had the pleasure of teaching a young boy named Cooper Phillips. And that was when I began my first education about dyslexia, because his mother kindly and gently taught me all about Cooper, which was a game changer as far as my view about teaching children to read. I think about my years of teaching and what I know now that I didn't know when I was teaching reading, even when I was a reading specialist, about the importance of structured literacy. I know I did some things with phonics. I can vividly remember teaching the kids sight words. Again, as I reflect on that time, I know I had some students that just didn't click with them. That method, that rote memorization, just didn't work with them. I could do that better now if I had a chance to go back and save those children. But I think that since I've been involved with Phillips Fundamental Learning Center and learned about all of the minutiae, all of the details, all of the structure, everything that has to happen to help a child learn to read, especially those who just don't pick up the code naturally, the ones that really struggle, whether they have dyslexia or whatever their learning challenge might be. I now know that, no sense in regretting it, I can't go back, but I now know that if I'd had that kind of training, I could have probably saved more children.
My name is Cynthia Lane, but most people know me as Cindy, and I'm a probably 40 plus educator in Kansas, where I've spent all my career My current role is as the director of the Blueprint for Literacy, shorthand director of literacy for the Kansas Board of Regents. And most of my career was in special education. Frankly, most of it was in leadership in special education. And then for the first 25 years, and then the last half of my career was in education administration. I was actually a superintendent of schools for Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools, and retired from that 7 years ago, but haven't been able to sit still. So had the opportunity to be hired by K-Board to do this work in literacy, and I jumped right in. I am a person who struggled to learn to read. I didn't see through the smoke and mirrors of balanced literacy, and I had our whole system focused on that. When I say whole system, I mean pre-K through high school was engaged in literacy. Every school had a literacy plan, all these resources, leveled books, classroom libraries, training. I was sold a story. Unfortunately, my teachers and my kids and my families were sold a story.
Reflection, the teacher guilt cycle. When I think back on my own journey, earning my reading endorsement but not learning the science of reading, trying to support middle schoolers with the tools I had, and then discovering dyslexia through my daughter, I remember thinking, how did I miss this? How did I not know? But I wasn't taught. None of us were. Teacher guilt runs deep because teachers feel like they should have known, but the institutions never taught them. And for children, dyslexia was invisible, misunderstood, misdiagnosed, missed entirely. This season is about rewriting that story, about lifting the shame and replacing it with knowledge, advocacy, and action. When teachers rise up for truth, the classroom becomes the first act of revolution. Where we go from here. Here's the good news. Teachers and parents together are building a movement, one grounded in science, compassion, and transparency. We're seeing it in Kansas. We're seeing it across the country. And this season, we're going to hear from the people driving that change. Like Amy Trombetti and Barb Orsi, experts in parent advocacy and consultants who walk families through the system. Teachers who fought resistance in their own districts. Administrators who changed course. And students whose lives were transformed because someone taught them the code. The movement is real, and it's growing.
The state of Kansas is finally starting to realize that we have a reading problem and that we need to put some steps into place to help meet the needs of these students who are struggling. We're no longer just kind of going, they can't read, it'll be okay. And I think they've implemented the letters training, and they're opening the eyes of teachers who were taught how to teach whole language. And the teachers want to do well, but they didn't know the steps to take to get better at teaching reading. We have things in colleges that are teaching new teachers how to teach students how to read and what's important. So I definitely feel like we're on the right track.
Then it all starts with recognizing and acknowledging, like you said, like, okay, we do have a problem. We are taking steps. Yeah. Yes. And like you said earlier too, moving into that space of now, what does it practically look like in my classroom? Now that I'm aware of the science of reading through letters, or maybe people have had other trainings on that approved list for the seal. Right. But then how do I practically use it, and even being willing to be coached or have cohorts where people are being supported in their classrooms on, okay, now how do I make these adjustments?
And I think we need to give teachers permission to say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I need some help. And to allow them to watch somebody who teaches science of reading in their classroom. Yeah. It's okay not to know it all. It's not okay not to try to learn how to do things better. Yeah. Because it's good for you. It's what's best for your class. And so being open-minded and just not being afraid to go out there and try new things, and know that, some things are going to go really well the first time, and some things are not because you're not sure about it. So it's okay to make mistakes, but then to tweak and redo it, because your main goal is to get your students competent in their beginning reading skills, and you have to start somewhere.
What Joyce describes is possible everywhere. When teachers are equipped, supported, and empowered, students thrive.
Hi, I'm Katie O'Donnell, a teacher who works with students who struggle to read every day. If you've ever wondered what dyslexia really is, or how to talk about it with your child's school, you're not alone, and you don't have to figure it out by yourself. That's why Janine Phillips hosts a free monthly conversation called Dyslexia, Let's Talk About It. It's a Dyslexia 101 workshop for parents, educators, and allies who want clarity, confidence, and a place to ask real questions. We meet every third Thursday of the month, online and in person, at Phillips Fundamental Learning Center, because advocacy starts with understanding, and we're stronger when we learn together. To RSVP, call 316-684-7323. We look forward to hearing from you.
Before we wrap today's episode, here's what I want you to do. If you're a parent, go back and listen to Season 1. It gives you the language, the tools, and the grounding you need to advocate confidently for your child. If you're a teacher, revisit Season 2, especially Episode 3 on the reading brain and the Episode 4 on systems change. You deserve that knowledge, and your students deserve it too. If you're a literacy advocate or policymaker, share this episode with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's carrying guilt for something they were never taught. And hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because this season is going to empower you, challenge you, and equip you. Next time, we step into the force that has powered some of the biggest changes in literacy, parent advocacy. We'll talk with Barb Orsi and Amy Trombetti, two experts who have guided hundreds of families through special education meetings, evaluations, dyslexia identification, and the maze of school systems that often say no before they say yes. We're calling Season 3, Episode 2, Parent Advocacy 101, Fighting for Your Child's Right to Read. And as Frederick Douglass said, once you learn to read, you will be forever free. I'll see you there. Thanks for listening to My Child Can't Read, a Heartland Crisis. If today's episode resonated with you, if you saw yourself, your child, or your classroom in these stories, you're not alone. We believe every child can learn to read, and every parent and teacher deserves the knowledge to help them. I invite you to take action today by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode, rate and review to help others find this series, and tell us about your story and discover how the Phillips Fundamental Learning Center is changing lives through literacy at funlearn.org/podcast. That's funlearn.org/podcast. And share this show with a friend, teacher, or fellow parent who needs to hear it. All resources, source credits, and tools mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes. Remember, together we can rewrite the story, one reader at a time, right here in the Heartland.